They call him a savior, a god, a beacon of strength in a chaotic world. But the legend of Hercules did not begin with glory. It began with a silence so heavy, so suffocating, that it drowned out the screams of the dying. Before the labors, before the fame, Hercules was a man standing in a pool of blood that belonged to his own children. We are told he was the mighty son of Zeus, destined for the throne of Mycenae. But destiny is a cruel architect. The goddess Hera, consumed by a burning jealousy over her husband's infidelity, orchestrated a cosmic coup before Hercules even drew his first breath. She forced his cousin, the weak and cowardly Eurystheus, to be born prematurely, stealing the birthright and the crown that Zeus had intended for his son. But stealing a throne was not enough for the Queen of Heaven. She wanted to break the hero's soul. In a moment of vulnerability, while Hercules waited for news from the oracle to see if he could escape his cousin's rule, Hera planted a seed of absolute madness deep within his mind. The hallucination was total and terrifying. Hercules did not see his beloved wife, Megara, or his innocent sons. His eyes were veiled by a divine curse, twisting their faces into the visages of hideous monsters and enemies of the state. Believing he was defending his home from a demonic invasion, the greatest warrior on earth unleashed his full, God-killing strength upon the only people he ever loved. He fought with the ferocity of a wild beast, unaware that the bones snapping under his grip were those of his own kin. When the red mist finally lifted, when the madness receded like a tide revealing a shipwreck, Hercules found himself standing amidst the carnage. His wife and children lay dead at his feet, destroyed by the very hands that had sworn to protect them. The realization shattered him. He fled into the wilderness, engulfed in a depression so black that it nearly consumed him entirely, wandering distant lands as a broken shell of a man. But time, though slow, began to knit the edges of his sanity back together. Desperate for redemption, desperate to scrub the stain of kinslaying from his soul, he returned to the oracle of Delphi. The answer he received was a bitter pill. To purify himself, he had to submit to the very man who had stolen his throne. He had to serve King Eurystheus. King Eurystheus was a man paralyzed by fear. He looked at Hercules and saw not a cousin, but a threat, a walking natural disaster who could crush his skull with a casual thought. Eurystheus knew he couldn't kill Hercules, so he decided to let the world do it for him. He would assign tasks so impossible, so lethal, that they were essentially execution orders disguised as errands. The first of these was the Nemean Lion. This was no ordinary predator stalking the underbrush. It was a biological nightmare, a monster rumored to be the offspring of the giants Typhon and Echidna. It had depopulated the region of Argos, devouring men and developing a craving for human flesh. Its pelt was said to be enchanted, utterly invulnerable to mortal weapons. When Hercules arrived in the forests of Nemea, he found a land stripped of life. No birds sang, no deer grazed. There was only the silence of the apex predator. Hercules tracked the beast to its lair, a grim cave littered with the bleached skulls of its victims. As the creature emerged, massive and rippling with muscle, Hercules drew his bow. He was the finest archer in Greece, and his aim was true. The arrow flew, striking the beast squarely in the head, and shattered. It bounced off the golden fur as if it had struck a granite wall. The lion didn't even flinch. It simply roared, a sound that shook the leaves from the trees. Hercules struck it with his heavy club, a blow that would have pulverized a chariot, but the lion simply shook it off, unharmed. In that moment, realized his weapons were useless. To kill a monster, he had to become one. Discarding his bow and club, Hercules barricaded the cave entrance to prevent escape and walked into the darkness to face the beast with nothing but his bare hands. It was a brutal, primal melee of claw against muscle. The lion tore at his flesh, but Hercules ignored the pain, wrapping his immense arms around the beast's thick neck. He squeezed until the roar turned to a gasp, and the gasp turned to silence. The invulnerable beast had been suffocated by the only force stronger than magic, the will of Hercules. To skin the beast, he had to use its own razor-sharp claws, the only thing in existence capable of cutting its hide. He returned to Mycenae wearing the lion's skin as a cloak, a gruesome trophy that terrified Eurystheus so deeply that the king jumped into a bronze barrel to hide, refusing to even look the hero in the eye. But the king's fear quickly turned to malice. If a physical beast couldn't kill Hercules, perhaps a magical abomination could. He ordered Hercules to travel to the swamps of Lerna to exterminate the Hydra. This creature was another spawn of Typhon and Echidna, a multi-headed serpent whose very blood was a virulent poison. The swamp itself was a toxic wasteland, the air thick with a stench that could rot the lungs. Hercules did not go alone. He brought his nephew Aeolus, a decision that would prove to be the difference between life and death. They found the Hydra's lair, a dark hole in the earth. Hercules drew the beast out by firing flaming arrows into the cave, and from the gloom emerged a horror of writhing necks and hissing jaws. Hercules attacked with his mace, smashing one of the snakeheads into pulp. But before the gore could even settle, the flesh bubbled and twisted, and two new heads erupted from the bloody stump. It was a battle of attrition that Hercules was destined to lose. For every head he crushed, the monster grew stronger, its multiplicity mocking his strength. To make matters worse, Hera, watching from Olympus with spiteful eyes, sent a giant crab to distract him, pinching at his heels in the mud. Hercules crushed the crab under his heel, but the Hydra was overwhelming him. The air was filled with snapping jaws and poisonous fumes. Realizing that brute force was feeding the monster, Hercules roared to Aeolus to grab a torch. The strategy changed. As Hercules shattered a head, Aeolus lunged forward, jamming the burning brand into the open wound. The flesh sizzled and cauterized instantly, sealing the neck before the regenerative magic could take hold. One by one, head by head, they burned the monster into submission. Finally, only the central head remained, an immortal, unkillable piece of evil. Hercules severed it and buried it deep beneath a massive rock, trapping it for eternity. But before he left the rot of Lerna, he did something that would alter his fate forever. He took his arrows and dipped them into the Hydra's open veins, coating them in the creature's fatal venom. He had come to the swamp a warrior. He left as a man possessing the ultimate weapon of death. With the blood of the Hydra still staining his hands, Hercules returned to Mycenae, a living testament to the impossible. But King Eurystheus was not relieved. He was terrified. His plan to use monsters as executioners had failed. So the king shifted his strategy from brute force to psychological torture. He would not just try to kill Hercules. He would try to break his spirit with tasks that defied the laws of nature and dignity. The third labor was a test of agonizing patience. Hercules was ordered to capture the Ceryneian Hind, a creature of such ethereal beauty and supernatural speed that it could outrun the wind itself. This was no monster to be bludgeoned. It was a sacred beast of the goddess Artemis, possessing hooves of bronze and antlers of solid gold. To harm it would be to incur the wrath of Olympus. For an entire year, Hercules became a shadow in the wilderness, chasing the elusive creature through the shifting seasons, across mountains and rivers, pushing his body past the brink of exhaustion. He did not sleep. He hunted. Finally, near the banks of the river Lerna, he cornered the beast. With surgical precision, he fired an arrow that pierced the tendons of its legs without drawing a drop of fatal blood, immobilizing it just enough to capture it. But his victory was nearly cut short when the goddess Artemis materialized before him, her eyes blazing with fury at the sacrilege. It took the humble plea of a desperate man explaining his servitude to the oracle's decree to stay her hand. She allowed him to take the beast to Eurystheus on one condition: it must be released unharmed. Hercules kept his word, presenting the shimmering creature to the king before letting it vanish back into the wild, leaving Eurystheus frustrated once again. The king's malice grew colder, quite literally. For the fourth labor, he sent Hercules into the frozen wastelands of Mount Erymanthos to capture a boar so massive and ferocious that it decimated the countryside. The Erymanthian boar was a primal engine of destruction, but Hercules knew that fighting it on solid ground was a fool's errand. Instead, he used the environment as his weapon. With terrifying shouts, he drove the beast higher and higher into the mountains, forcing it into deep, treacherous snowdrifts, where its own immense weight became its prison. The great boar floundered, exhausted and helpless against the cold, allowing Hercules to bind it in chains. He dragged the snarling monster all the way back to the palace alive. The sight of the gigantic beast was so overwhelming that Eurystheus, in a display of pathetic cowardice that was becoming his trademark, once again dove headfirst into his bronze jar to hide, screaming for the hero to take it away. But if the snows of Erymanthus were a physical trial, the fifth labor was a calculated insult designed to humiliate the son of Zeus. Eurystheus ordered Hercules to clean the stables of King Augean in a single day. This was not a hero's task. It was a slave's nightmare. The stables housed thousands of cattle and had not been cleaned for years, accumulating mountains of manure that reeked of disease and decay. Eurystheus smiled, believing that Hercules would either fail due to the sheer volume of the filth or refuse the job out of pride. But Hercules looked at the impossible pile of excrement and saw a problem of engineering, not labor. He did not pick up a shovel. Instead, he walked to the nearby rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, and with his godlike strength, he tore through the earth, diverting their raging currents directly toward the stables. The water crashed through the barn doors like a cleansing tsunami, washing away decades of filth in a matter of hours, and leaving the stone floor spotless. When Hercules went to collect his payment, a tenth of the cattle promised by King Augean, the king laughed in his face, denying the deal ever existed. It was a grave mistake. Hercules did not forget. Years later, he would return not as a laborer, but as a warlord, leading an army to sack the city, kill the oath-breaking king, and place his honorable son Phyleus on the throne. The journey of penance continued, leading Hercules into the realm of horror. The sixth labor took him to the dark waters of Lake Stymphalia, where the sky was blotted out by a flock of monstrous birds. These were the Stymphalian birds, man-eaters with beaks of bronze and feathers sharp as daggers. They were too numerous to fight with a club and too distant to reach. Hercules stood on the shore, the deafening screeching of the flock clawing at his mind. He needed a way to flush them out. The goddess Athena, watching her brothers struggle, descended to gift him a pair of bronze castanets, or a rattle, forged by the smith god Hephaestus. Hercules climbed a nearby hill and shook the divine instrument. The sound was unearthly, a metallic cacophony that grated against the soul. Terrified by the noise, the birds took flight in a chaotic cloud. As they filled the sky, Hercules drew his bow, now tipped with the lethal Hydra venom, and picked them off one by one, watching them plummet into the dark waters below like stones. Without a moment to rest, the labors escalated in violence. Eurystheus demanded the capture of the Cretan bull, a beast possessed by a madness instilled by Poseidon himself. This was the father of the Minotaur, a creature of pure, unbridled fury that breathed fire and shattered stone. Hercules sailed to Crete, where King Minos was all too happy to be rid of the monster. In a contest of raw power, Hercules wrestled the bull to the ground, overpowering the divine rage coursing through its veins. He bound the creature and shipped it back to Mycenae, only for Eurystheus to release it again in his foolishness, leaving it to wander Greece until the hero Theseus would one day end its life on the plains of Marathon. But the darkness of the labors was only deepening. The eighth task brought Hercules to the savage land of Thrace, ruled by King Diomedes, a son of the war god Ares. Diomedes was a tyrant who had rejected the sacred laws of hospitality, feeding strangers and guests to his 4 mares. These were not normal horses. They were carnivores, chained with iron, their eyes wild with the taste of human flesh. Hercules arrived with a small band of companions, including his young lover, Abderus. Upon discovering the atrocity, Hercules fought the king's guards and dragged the screaming Diomedes to the stables. In a stroke of gruesome justice, he threw the king into the manger, where his own horses devoured him alive. The feast of royal flesh calmed the beasts, but the victory came at a terrible price. While Hercules fought the soldiers, he had left Abderus in charge of the mares, and the boy had been dragged to his death by the man-eaters. Heartbroken, Hercules buried his friend and founded the city of Abdera in his honor, a monument to the cost of heroism. The ninth labor promised a change of pace, a journey to the land of the Amazons to retrieve the girdle of Queen Hippolyta. It began with surprising civility. Hippolyta, impressed by Hercules' strength and renown, agreed to give him the girdle willingly. It seemed, for once, a labor would end without bloodshed. But Hera, the architect of Hercules' misery, would not allow an easy victory. Disguising herself as an Amazon warrior, she walked among the women, whispering a poisonous lie. that Hercules was not there for the girdle, but to kidnap their beloved queen. The whisper became a shout, and the shout became a war cry. The Amazons grabbed their weapons and charged the ship. Seeing the sudden attack, Hercules believed Hippolyta had betrayed him. In the confusion and adrenaline of the melee, the hero struck the queen down, killing the very woman who had offered him friendship. He stripped the blood-soaked girdle from her lifeless body and set sail, the weight of another unnecessary death pressing heavy on his soul. He was conquering the world, but with every labor, the world was taking a piece of him in return. The 10th labor marked a turning point, pushing Hercules beyond the boundaries of the civilized world to the very edge of the map. Eurystheus commanded him to steal the red cattle of Geryon, a giant who lived on the mythical island of Erythea, a place bathed in the crimson light of the setting sun near the Iberian Peninsula. To reach this distant land, Hercules had to cross an ocean no Greek had ever sailed. When a massive mountain blocked his path, he did not climb it. He split it in half with his own hands, tearing the earth apart to connect the Mediterranean to the Atlantic, creating the legendary Pillars of Hercules that still stand today at the Strait of Gibraltar. Upon reaching the island, the silence was broken by the growls of Orthrus, a two-headed watchdog and brother to the hound of hell, Cerberus. Hercules silenced the beast with his mace, only to face Geryon himself, a grotesque monstrosity of nature, possessing 3 distinct bodies fused into one. The battle was catastrophic, shaking the island to its core. But as they fought, Hercules sensed a divine presence. Hera was there, invisible, aiding the giant. In a moment of supreme defiance, the mortal hero fired an arrow not at the beast, but at the goddess herself, wounding her and sending her fleeing back to Olympus. With the divine interference removed, Hercules drove a poison-soaked arrow through Geryon's 3 bodies, ending the giant's life and claiming the cattle. The 11th labor was a quest, not for a beast, but for a secret. Hercules was sent to find the garden of the Hesperides and steal the golden apples, a wedding gift to Hera from Gaia, guarded by Ladon, an immortal dragon with 100 heads. The location was a mystery, leading Hercules on a wandering path where he found Prometheus, the Titan who gave fire to humanity, chained to a rock while an eagle ate his regenerating liver every day. Unable to watch the torture of mankind's benefactor, Hercules shattered the chains and shot the eagle, freeing the Titan. In gratitude, Prometheus revealed the secret: do not fight the dragon. Instead, seek out Atlas. Hercules climbed to the highest peaks to find the Titan Atlas, condemned to hold the crushing weight of the entire celestial vault on his shoulders for eternity. Hercules made a deal. He would shoulder the burden of the cosmos if Atlas would fetch the apples. For a brief, agonizing eternity, the hero stood with the universe on his back, his muscles screaming under the weight of the stars. Atlas returned with the apples, but, tasting freedom, refused to take the sky back, promising to deliver the apples himself, a trap that would leave Hercules imprisoned forever. Thinking quickly, Hercules feigned defeat. He asked Atlas to hold the sky for just a second, so he could adjust his cloak for padding. The foolish Titan agreed, and the moment the weight transferred, Hercules snatched the apples and walked away, leaving Atlas cursing under the heavens once more. Finally, Eurystheus played his last, most desperate card. He ordered Hercules to do what no living man should ever do: descend into the realm of the dead and kidnap Cerberus, the three-headed guardian of the underworld. This was a suicide mission, designed to erase Hercules from existence. The hero prepared by initiating himself into the Eleusinian mysteries, to understand the secrets of death and rebirth, then traveled to a hidden cave entrance guided by Hermes. The underworld was a place of oppressive gloom and silent screams. Hercules marched past the shades of the dead until he stood before the throne of Hades himself. The Lord of the Dead, perhaps respecting the hero's audacity, offered a chilling bargain. Hercules could take the dog, but he could use no weapons, no club, no arrows, no blade. He had to dominate the monster with nothing but the strength of his hands. Hercules found Cerberus at the gates, a nightmare of fur, muscle, and serpents. The beast possessed 3 snarling heads and a tail made of a living snake. As Hercules lunged, the creature snapped and thrashed, its serpent tail lashing at his skin. It was the ultimate wrestling match, the demigod of strength against the embodiment of death. Hercules locked his arms around the beast's multiple necks, applying pressure that could crush diamonds. The dog howled, choked, and finally submitted. Dragging the whimpering monster up from the dark depths, Hercules emerged into the sunlight. The rays of the sun sickened the hellhound, causing it to vomit poisonous bile onto the earth, spawning toxic plants where the fluid touched the ground. When Hercules threw the beast at the feet of Eurystheus, the king finally broke. Terrified beyond reason, he dove into his bronze barrel and begged Hercules to take the monster away, releasing the hero from his servitude forever. Hercules had done the impossible 12 times over. He had conquered beasts, gods, and death itself. He was no longer just a son of Zeus. He was a legend carved in starlight, destined not for the grave, but for immortality among the gods. The iron chains of servitude were finally broken. Eurystheus, the man who had tormented the son of Zeus for years, was left trembling in the shadows of his own palace, defeated not by violence, but by the sheer, undeniable greatness of his rival. Hercules stood as a free man, hailed as the ultimate benefactor of mankind, a savior who had purged the world of its darkest monsters. King Eurystheus, the man who had spent a lifetime trying to bury Hercules under the weight of monsters, finally surrendered. He realized a bitter truth that no force, not the fangs of the Nemean Lion, the venom of the Hydra, nor the shadows of hell itself, could break the will of Zeus's son. He was forced to release the hero from his servitude. Hercules had reached the pinnacle of glory. From a cursed kinslayer, he had risen to become mankind's greatest benefactor, sweeping the earth clean of its nightmares. But these labors were not merely feats of muscle. They were a journey of salvation. Every monster slain was a piece of his past guilt washed away. Yet destiny was not finished with the hero. The ancient legends tell us that this was not the end of his road. Hercules would still have to face cruel trials, tragic love, and ultimate betrayal before he could finally shed his mortal shell to stand beside his father. The story of the 12 labors ends here. But the legend of Hercules, of an iron will that dared to challenge fate, echoes through eternity. For sometimes, the most terrifying monsters do not hide in deep forests or the underworld, but in the shadows of our own past, that we must fight every day to overcome. But the final chapter of Hercules' life was not written in the blood of enemies, but in the poison of betrayal. Years after his liberation, Hercules married the princess Deianira, hoping for the peace that had long evaded him. During their travels, they came to a rushing river, guarded by the centaur Nessus. The beast offered to carry Deianira across, but in the middle of the stream, his animal instincts took over, and he attempted to violate her. From the riverbank, Hercules drew his mighty bow. He fired a single arrow, its tip soaked in the black venom of the Hydra, the very weapon he had crafted in his youth. The arrow pierced the centaur's heart. As Nessus lay dying, his blood poisoned by the Hydra's venom, he whispered a final malevolent lie to Deianira. He told her that his blood was a magical love potion, and if Hercules ever looked at another woman, she should smear it on his clothes to win back his heart. Deianira, naive and desperate to keep her husband's love, collected the tainted blood. Years later, fearing that Hercules was falling for another, she sent him a tunic soaked in the centaur's blood. It was a gift born of love, but it carried the touch of death. When Hercules put on the tunic, the heat of his body activated the dormant Hydra venom. The fabric did not just cling to him, it fused to his skin like boiling tar. The pain was absolute. It was a fire that water could not quench. In his agony, Hercules tried to rip the tunic off, but he only succeeded in tearing away his own flesh. The hero who had held up the sky and wrestled death itself fell to his knees, defeated not by a monster, but by a trick. Realizing his end had come, he climbed Mount Oeta and built his own funeral pyre. He laid down upon the wood, his face set in stone, and commanded the fire to be lit. As the flames roared toward the heavens, consuming his mortal body, the gods looked down. Zeus, refusing to let his son perish into nothingness, sent a bolt of lightning to strike the pyre. The fire burned away the mortal part of Hercules, the part that could suffer and bleed. But his divine spirit, forged in the fires of 12 impossible labors, ascended. He rose to Mount Olympus, not as a hero, but as a god, finally finding the peace he had searched for his entire life.